The 7 wolf pups were already screaming when the Omega reached the slave trader's cart. Their tiny white bodies were chained together beneath a filthy canvas. One had blood on its muzzle. Another could barely stand. The trader raised his whip. Then the Omega stepped between them. She had no weapon, no pack, no alpha protecting her, only a torn cloak around her shoulders and blood running down one arm. The trader laughed when she told him to let the pups go. He did not know she had already decided to die for them. She grabbed a broken piece of iron and cut through the first chain, then the second, then the third. One by one, she pulled the 7 terrified pups from the cart, while the trader's men closed around her. And just when the last chain snapped, a howl exploded through the forest. Every wolf froze. The Alpha King had arrived. Kael Draven stepped from the darkness with his royal guards behind him. His eyes went straight to the 7 white pups, then to the woman standing over them. His face changed, because he knew her. Seraphina. The Omega he had rejected before the entire kingdom 5 years earlier. The woman he had been told was dead. She looked at him as if he were a stranger. Kael took one step toward her. Seraphina immediately pulled the smallest pup against her chest. "Do not touch them." Kael stopped. Then the pup lifted its head. A silver royal mark appeared beneath its white fur. Kael's wolf suddenly roared inside him. He knew that mark. It belonged to the bloodline that had disappeared from the kingdom 1,000 years ago. But before Kael could ask why 7 supposedly worthless pups carried a royal symbol, the slave trader laughed. He told the Alpha King that he had no idea what he was protecting. Then he revealed something that made Kael's blood turn cold. The pups had not been captured for money. They had been captured because someone wanted them alive, someone inside the royal palace. Kael looked at Seraphina. For the first time, he noticed the way she was protecting the pups. Not like an Omega protecting animals, like a mother protecting her children. Then an arrow flew from the trees. Seraphina pushed the smallest pup out of the way. The arrow buried itself in her chest. Kael caught her before she hit the snow. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked at him, and instead of asking him for help, she whispered, the one sentence that made the Alpha King realize his entire life had been a lie. "They told you I abandoned you." Her fingers tightened around his cloak. "But I was running because I was carrying your 7 heirs." Kael went completely still. Behind him, the slave trader's cart caught fire. The flames climbed into the frozen night. And from inside the burning cart came the sound of a hidden 8th heartbeat. Kael stared into the flames. There were 7 pups. He could see them. But there was something else inside that cart. Something the slave traders had been hiding from him. Something that had survived for 5 years. And when Kael heard that 8th heartbeat stop, Seraphina suddenly screamed, because she knew exactly whose child was inside the fire. The first thing Alpha King Kael Draven saw was blood on the snow. It was too bright against the frozen white ground. Too fresh. Too much. His black horse stopped without being commanded. Behind him, the royal warriors slowed one after another until the entire northern road became silent. Kael lifted his head and listened. Somewhere beyond the dark trees, a small cry broke through the wind. Then another cry answered it. Then another. 7 frightened voices. 7 tiny lives calling from somewhere inside the forest. Kael's wolf rose inside him with a warning growl. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Kael dismounted and stepped into the snow. His boots sank deep with every step. Cold air burned his lungs as he moved between the trees. The smell of blood became stronger. Then he saw the cart. It was an old wooden slave cart with broken wheels and iron chains hanging from its sides. Several armed men stood around it, but Kael barely noticed them. His eyes had already found the woman standing in front of the cart. She was barefoot. Her pale dress was torn. Blood covered one side of her shoulder. Snow had gathered in her dark hair. Her body trembled from the cold, but she refused to move. In her arms, she held a tiny white wolf pup. 6 more white pups were hiding behind her legs. Their small bodies shook with fear. Their eyes were wide. Their tiny paws were still marked by the iron chains. Kael stopped breathing. He knew that woman. Even after 5 years, he knew her. Seraphina Vale, the Omega he had rejected before the entire royal court. The woman he had once watched walk through the palace gates with tears in her eyes. The woman whose name had slowly disappeared from royal conversations until people began saying she must have died somewhere beyond the northern mountains. Kael had believed it. He had forced himself to believe it because remembering her had become too painful. But now she stood before him alive. Older, harder, stronger. And when her eyes met his, there was no warmth inside them. There was no love. There was no hope. There was only cold silence. One of the slave traders stepped toward her and demanded that she surrender the pups. Seraphina did not answer. She only tightened her arms around the little white creature against her chest. The trader raised his sword and warned her that the pups belonged to him. He said they had been bought and that nobody had the right to interfere. Kael looked at the chains. Then he looked at the blood on Seraphina's shoulder. His jaw tightened. 5 years ago, he had allowed fear to control him. He had allowed lies to make him hurt the woman who had loved him. He would not make the same mistake again. Lower your sword. The trader laughed. He did not recognize the voice. Kael stepped forward. I said lower it. The man finally saw the royal crest on Kael's armor. His face changed. He looked around at the warriors surrounding him. His confidence disappeared, but pride kept him standing. He lifted his sword again and claimed that the northern trade laws protected his business. Kael looked at him with an expression so calm that even his own warriors became uneasy. Then he drew his sword. The fight lasted less than a minute. Steel flashed beneath the trees. Snow exploded beneath running feet. One trader tried to escape, but a royal warrior caught him before he reached the forest. Another dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. The leader charged Kael with a desperate scream. Kael moved once. His sword struck the man's weapon from his hand. A second movement sent him crashing into the snow. Silence returned. Kael turned toward the cart. Burn it. His captain stared at him. Your Majesty? Burn the cart. The order was repeated. Torches were thrown onto the dry wood. Flames climbed the broken frame. Smoke twisted into the night sky. The chains turned red from the heat before snapping apart. Seraphina watched the fire without moving. Kael slowly walked toward her. He wanted to say her name, but the word felt dangerous after everything he had done. You are hurt. Seraphina looked at him. I have survived worse. Kael felt the word strike deeper than any blade. He looked at the pups. Who are they? Seraphina held his gaze. Children. Kael frowned. They are wolf pups. Her expression hardened. That is what people call them when they want to pretend they cannot feel pain. Kael had no answer. One of the smallest pups suddenly stepped from behind her. It was completely white except for a faint silver mark beneath its neck. Seraphina watched as it walked toward Kael. The little creature stopped beside his boot. Kael slowly lowered himself onto one knee. The pup sniffed his hand. Then it touched its nose against his palm. A strange warmth rushed through him. His wolf awakened violently. Kael nearly lost his balance. He knew that mark. The Moonblood mark. A royal bloodline believed to have been destroyed years ago. His eyes moved from the pup to Seraphina. Where did you find them? Seraphina shook her head. I did not find them. Kael stared. Then where did they come from? Her eyes became colder. They found me. Before Kael could ask what that meant, an arrow flew from the darkness. Seraphina saw it first. She pushed the white pup away. The arrow struck her shoulder. She fell backward. Kael caught her before she hit the snow. Blood covered his hands. The 7 pups began screaming. Kael shouted for his warriors to search the forest. His wolf was already hunting the scent of the attacker. Seraphina opened her eyes for one brief moment. She looked at the man who had once broken her heart. Kael whispered her name. Seraphina gave him a faint, bitter smile. Now you know how it feels to lose someone. Her eyes closed. Kael froze. 5 years of silence disappeared in one terrible second. He looked toward the dark forest. His eyes slowly turned silver. Someone had tried to kill Seraphina. Someone wanted the 7 pups, and whoever had fired that arrow had just made the greatest mistake of their life. They had awakened the Alpha King. Kael did not move for several seconds. Seraphina lay unconscious in his arms while blood continued to spread across the torn fabric near her shoulder. Snow fell around them in slow, silent flakes. The fire behind him consumed the last pieces of the slave cart. The 7 white pups had gathered around Seraphina and were crying softly. Their tiny bodies pressed against her legs as if they understood that she was hurt because of them. Kael looked at their faces and felt something inside him change. 5 years ago, he had walked away from Seraphina because he believed she was dangerous. Tonight, he had found her bleeding in the snow while protecting creatures that carried a royal mark no living wolf should possess. He carefully lifted her and ordered his warriors to prepare the fastest horses. Nobody questioned him. They could see the fear in their king's eyes. Kael carried Seraphina himself until they reached the royal carriage. He placed her inside and climbed in beside her. The 7 pups followed without hesitation. One climbed onto the seat beside her. Another curled against her feet. Kael watched them silently as the carriage raced toward the palace. The journey through the northern forest felt endless. Seraphina remained unconscious. Every time the carriage struck a stone, her breathing became weaker. Kael kept one hand near her shoulder without touching the wound. He was afraid that if he touched her again, he would remember the moment she had once held his hand beneath the moon. He remembered her smile. He remembered how she used to wait for him near the western gardens. He remembered the night before the rejection when she had asked whether he believed the moon goddess could make mistakes. He had told her no. The next morning, he had rejected her. Now he wondered whether the mistake had been his. A soft growl came from the floor. Kael looked down. The smallest white pup was staring at him. Its silver mark was visible beneath its fur. The pup crawled closer. Kael reached toward it. The instant his fingers touched its head, a strange image flashed through his mind. He saw a burning palace. He saw 7 infants wrapped in white cloth. He saw a woman running through a forest with one child against her chest. Then he saw himself standing beside that woman. Not as king, not as enemy, as something else. The vision vanished before he could understand it. The palace gates opened before dawn. He carried Seraphina through the entrance while healers rushed toward him. The sight shocked every guard who saw them. The lost Omega had returned. The woman who had vanished 5 years earlier had been brought back in the arms of the king who had rejected her. Rumors spread through the palace before the healers had even reached the medical wing. Kael ordered everyone to remain silent. He ordered that no one approach the pups without his permission. Then he stood outside the healing chamber while the royal healer worked. Hours passed. The 7 pups refused to leave the doorway. They slept in a tight circle on the cold stone floor. Every time a servant tried to move them, they growled. Kael finally told everyone to leave them alone. He understood something now. They were not simply protecting Seraphina. They were protecting something far more important. When Seraphina finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was a white ceiling. The second thing she noticed was the warmth beneath her body. The third thing was the sound of someone breathing near the door. She turned her head. Kael stood there. He looked exhausted. His dark hair was disordered. His armor was still stained with blood. He had not slept. Seraphina immediately remembered the forest. She tried to sit up. Pain tore through her shoulder. Kael stepped forward. She raised her hand. Stop. He stopped. She looked at him for several seconds. 5 years had passed, but one word remained between them. Rejected. Kael wanted to explain. He wanted to tell her that he had been lied to. but Seraphina looked away. She asked where the pups were. Kael told her they were safe. She asked whether anyone had touched them. He said no. Only then did some tension leave her face. Kael asked her who had attacked them. Seraphina said she did not know. He asked whether the slave traders had been looking for the pups specifically. She remained silent. Kael noticed the hesitation. He asked again. Seraphina finally admitted that the traders had been transporting the pups toward the southern kingdoms. She had followed them for 3 days. She had watched them beat the animals whenever they made noise. She had waited for the right moment. When the cart became trapped in the snow, she had attacked the locks. She had freed 6 pups before the traders discovered her. The 7th had been trapped beneath a broken chain. That was when the fighting had started. Kael listened without interrupting. Then he asked why she had risked her life for them. Seraphina looked toward the doorway. Her answer was quiet. Because nobody came for them. Kael felt those words inside his chest. Nobody had come for her either. He asked where she had been for 5 years. Seraphina refused to answer. He told her that he deserved the truth. She looked at him and said that he had lost the right to demand anything from her when he rejected her in front of the entire kingdom. Kael accepted the words. He did not argue. Then she said something that changed the room. The pups were not ordinary wolves. Kael already suspected that, but he was not prepared for the next truth. Seraphina told him that each pup carried royal blood. One belonged to an ancient line that had disappeared. Another carried a blood mark connected to the first Moon Queen. The others carried different symbols that had not been seen for generations. She said someone had been hunting them since birth. The slave traders were only the final link in a much larger chain. Kael asked why she was involved. Seraphina looked at him. Because they are my family. Kael stared. She continued before he could speak. She told him that she had spent years searching for them. She had followed rumors across villages and mountains. She had slept in abandoned houses. She had gone hungry. She had fought wolves twice her size. She had learned how to survive because there was nobody left to protect her. Then she looked directly into Kael's eyes and said that the woman he had rejected 5 years ago no longer existed. Kael whispered her name. Seraphina shook her head. You do not know me anymore. Before he could answer, the chamber doors opened. Elias rushed inside. His face was pale. He looked at Seraphina first and then at Kael. He told them that something had been discovered in the royal archives. Kael demanded to know what it was. Elias placed an old document on the table. It carried the seal of Kael's dead father. The document ordered every remaining member of the Moonblood family to be found and destroyed. Kael read the words twice. His hands tightened around the paper. Seraphina watched him. Then Elias revealed the worst part. The order had been written 12 years before. But beside the king's signature was another name, Lucan Voss, the oldest, counselor in the kingdom, the man who had advised Kael since childhood, the man who had told Kael that Seraphina was cursed. Kael slowly lifted his eyes. He understood. The rejection had never been his decision alone. Someone had wanted Seraphina gone. Someone had wanted the Moonblood bloodline erased. And someone had known about the 7 pups long before Kael ever found them. Then a scream echoed through the palace. 3. Lights in the corridor went dark. The 7 pups began howling at once, and from somewhere deep beneath the palace came the sound of iron chains being dragged across stone. Kael reached for his sword. Seraphina looked toward the darkness. Her face suddenly lost all color. She whispered one sentence. They found us. The sound beneath the palace became louder. Iron dragged across stone somewhere below them. The 7 white pups pressed together near Seraphina while Kael stood between them and the dark corridor. Every torch along the walls had gone out. The palace had never been silent like this before. Even the guards outside had stopped shouting. Then a deep growl rolled through the darkness. It did not sound like a wolf. It sounded older. Kael raised his sword and ordered the guards to seal every entrance. Nobody moved. A second sound came from beneath the floor. This time it was followed by a sharp crack. Stone split near the center of the corridor. Seraphina immediately pulled the pups behind her. Kael looked at her and saw fear for the first time since she had returned. Not fear for herself, fear for them. He stepped closer and asked what was beneath the palace. Seraphina shook her head and said she had never been inside this part of the kingdom. Elias looked toward the floor and whispered that the old royal maps showed nothing beneath this wing. Kael stared at the crack. Someone had built a hidden passage under his palace and had kept it secret from the king. The stone suddenly collapsed. A dark hole opened beneath them. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of ash and blood. Kael ordered everyone to stay back. He lowered himself near the opening and listened. Somewhere below came the faint sound of a child crying. Seraphina heard it too. Her expression changed instantly. She pushed past Kael and looked into the darkness. The pups began whining. She whispered that someone was down there. Kael grabbed her wrist before she could climb inside. She turned sharply. He told her it could be a trap. She pulled her hand free and reminded him that she had spent 5 years walking into places where traps were the only thing waiting for her. Then she climbed down. Kael followed without hesitation. Elias took the pups and came behind them. The hidden passage was narrow and wet. Roots pushed through the walls. Old symbols covered the stones. Some were painted with dried blood. Seraphina ran her fingers across one symbol and froze. It was the same silver mark carried by the smallest white pup. They reached a chamber beneath the palace. A single cage stood in the middle. Inside was an old man wearing torn royal clothing. His wrists were chained. His face was covered with scars. He looked up when Seraphina entered. For several seconds he stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost. Then he whispered her name. Seraphina stopped. She did not know him. Kael moved forward and demanded his identity. The prisoner looked at Kael and laughed bitterly. He said that Kael had his father's eyes. Kael asked whether he had served the old king. The man shook his head. He said he had served Seraphina's father. The room became silent. Seraphina stepped toward the cage and asked what happened to her family. The prisoner lowered his eyes. He said the official story was false. Her parents had not been killed by rebels. They had been betrayed from inside the palace. Seraphina's voice became unsteady. She asked who betrayed them. The prisoner looked toward Kael. Then he said the name Lucan Voss. Kael felt his chest tighten. He demanded proof. The prisoner pointed toward a small stone box beneath the cage. Elias pulled it free. Inside was an old royal seal and several letters. Kael recognized his father's handwriting immediately. One letter ordered Lucan to erase every trace of the Moonblood family. Another ordered the capture of the 7 heirs. The final letter contained only one sentence. Keep the Alpha King ignorant until the Moonblood princess disappears. Kael stared at the words. Seraphina looked at him. Her expression was not angry anymore. It was devastated. She finally understood that the rejection 5 years ago had been planned long before the ceremony. Kael asked the prisoner why his father had wanted Seraphina gone. The man said there was a prophecy. The Moonblood princess would one day stand beside the Alpha King and awaken 7 ancient bloodlines. If that happened, the Shadow Court would lose control of the kingdom. Kael frowned and asked who the Shadow Court was. The prisoner said it was not a story told to children. It was an organization that had controlled royal families for generations. They did not sit on thrones. They controlled those who did. Kael remembered the old council meetings. He remembered how Lucan always seemed to know what decision he would make before he made it. He remembered the night Lucan had warned him about Seraphina. The pieces began connecting. His rejection had not protected the kingdom. It had protected the people controlling it. Then the prisoner revealed something worse. He said Seraphina had not disappeared by choice. Someone had taken her from the road after she left the palace. She had been unconscious for 3 days. When she woke, she was already beyond the northern border. She had escaped only because another woman helped her. Seraphina looked confused. She asked who the woman was. The prisoner hesitated. Then he said she had been wearing the royal crest. Seraphina stared at him. She asked whether it had been her mother. The prisoner shook his head. He said the woman had looked exactly like her mother, but she was younger. Kael asked what that meant. The prisoner only said that the Moonblood family had another secret. Before anyone could ask another question, the cage door exploded. A blade flew through the chamber and struck the prisoner. He fell against the chains. Seraphina rushed toward him, but Kael pulled her back. Several black wolves entered through the passage. Their armor carried the same black crown symbol that appeared in the old records. The Shadow Court had found them. Kael attacked the first warrior. Steel crashed against steel. Elias took the pups and moved toward the rear passage. Seraphina fought beside Kael with a speed that surprised every warrior in the chamber. She no longer fought like the frightened Omega from 5 years ago. She moved like someone who had spent years learning how to survive. One attacker reached for the smallest white pup. Seraphina intercepted him. She struck him across the face and sent him crashing against the wall. The pup hid behind her. Kael saw the silver mark beneath its neck begin to shine. The chamber shook. Every ancient symbol on the walls awakened at once. The black crown symbols started cracking. The Shadow Court warriors backed away. One of them whispered that the first heir had awakened. Kael heard the words and understood that the pups were not simply being hunted. Someone was afraid of what they could become. Then Lucan entered the chamber. He walked through the fallen warriors as though nothing had happened. His royal robes were untouched. His face was calm. Kael stared at him with disbelief. Lucan looked toward the pups and then toward Seraphina. He said that she had survived longer than expected. Kael raised his sword and demanded the truth. Lucan smiled and told him that the truth was the reason he had rejected Seraphina. Kael stepped closer. Lucan said he had shown Kael the documents because he knew the young king was afraid of losing his throne. He had told him that Seraphina carried a curse. He had told him that the Moonblood bloodline would destroy everything Kael had built. None of it had been true. Kael's face hardened. He asked why Lucan had done it. Lucan looked at Seraphina and said that her blood was too powerful to be allowed beside the throne. Then he revealed the final part of the betrayal. Seraphina's rejection had been necessary because if Kael had accepted her 5 years ago, the 7 heirs would have awakened much sooner. Lucan had not wanted them dead yet. He had wanted them hidden until he could find all 7. Seraphina stared at him. You knew about them. Lucan smiled. I knew before you. Then he looked toward the pups, and now that you have gathered them together, the real power has finally returned. Kael stepped between Lucan and Seraphina. Lucan laughed softly. You still think you are protecting her? Kael tightened his grip on his sword. Lucan leaned closer. You are the reason she suffered. Kael froze. Lucan continued. You were never the king who saved her. You were the weapon we used to break her. Seraphina looked at Kael. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before: shame. Then Lucan revealed the final secret. He said Seraphina's mother was still alive, and she had been the one who helped create the 7 heirs. Seraphina's world stopped. Her mother was alive. The woman she had mourned for years had never been dead. She had been hiding, and if Lucan was telling the truth, then Seraphina's entire life had been built on another lie. Seraphina could not breathe. Her mother was alive. The woman she had mourned since childhood had not died in the flames of the Moonblood Palace. The woman whose face she had carried inside her memory for years had been somewhere in the shadows while Seraphina suffered alone. The revelation hurt more than the arrow in her shoulder. It hurt more than Kael's rejection. She stared at Lucan as if she could force the truth from his face. Then she asked where her mother was. Lucan smiled and refused to answer. Kael stepped forward with his sword raised. He demanded that Lucan tell them everything. Lucan only looked at him and said that kings should never ask questions when they already know the answer. Kael attacked. Lucan vanished into the darkness before the blade reached him. The remaining Shadow Court warriors followed him through the hidden passage. Kael wanted to chase them, but Seraphina stopped him. She was shaking. She told him that finding her mother mattered more than killing Lucan. Kael lowered his sword. He looked into her eyes and saw the same woman who had once trusted him completely. This time he promised he would not let her walk into the darkness alone. The prisoner in the cage was still alive. His breathing was weak. Seraphina knelt beside him and asked him to tell her everything he knew about her mother. He said her mother had escaped the Moonblood palace with 8 children. Seraphina immediately looked at the 7 pups. 8 children. The prisoner explained that one child had been separated from the others before the escape. He did not know where that child had gone. Seraphina felt a strange coldness move through her body. She asked whether the 8th child was one of the pups. The prisoner shook his head. He said the 7 pups had been protected by different bloodlines. The 8th was different. The 8th carried the direct blood of the Moonblood queen. Seraphina stared at him. She asked why nobody had told her. The prisoner said her mother believed that keeping the 8th heir hidden was the only way to keep the entire bloodline alive. Then the prisoner closed his eyes. His final words were barely audible. He told Seraphina that the 8th heir was still alive. The chamber became silent. Seraphina looked at Kael. Neither knew what to say. 7 pups had already changed the fate of the kingdom. Now there was an 8th heir somewhere in the world. Someone had hidden that child for 20 years. Someone had protected it from the Shadow Court. And if Lucan knew about it, then the enemy would never stop searching. Kael ordered Elias to seal the palace and send trusted warriors toward the northern border. He wanted every road watched, every village searched, every royal record opened. Seraphina stopped him. She said they could not search openly. If the Shadow Court was watching the palace, then every movement would reveal their plan. Kael agreed. For the first time in years, they were thinking like allies instead of enemies. But Seraphina still could not forget Lucan's words. "You were the weapon we used to break her." She looked at Kael and asked whether he had ever suspected the rejection was planned. He admitted that he had not. He said he had believed the documents. He had believed his father. He had believed the council. Most painfully, he had believed his own fear. Seraphina asked him what he had been afraid of. Kael looked down. He told her that he had been afraid of losing his crown. He had been afraid that if the Moonblood prophecy was true, then accepting her would make him weak. He had been afraid that the kingdom would turn against him. He had been afraid of loving someone whose existence could change everything. Seraphina listened quietly. Then she told him that fear did not excuse what he had done. Kael agreed. He did not defend himself. He simply said that he would carry the guilt for the rest of his life. Seraphina looked away. Something inside her had wanted him to make excuses. It would have been easier to hate him if he did. Instead, he accepted every wound he had caused. That made her anger more complicated. They returned to the upper palace before sunrise. The kingdom was beginning to wake. Guards stood along every corridor. Servants whispered behind closed doors. News of the attack had already spread. Seraphina entered the royal library with Kael and Elias. Thousands of ancient books filled the walls. Kael ordered the doors locked. They searched for anything connected to the Moonblood bloodline. After several hours, Elias found an old map hidden inside a damaged book. It showed the northern mountains and a forgotten temple beyond the border. A symbol had been drawn beside it. Seraphina recognized it immediately. It was the symbol her mother had used when she was a child. She remembered seeing it carved into the wooden box her mother had once kept beneath her bed. Seraphina touched the mark on the map. Her heart began racing. The temple. Kael asked whether she had ever been there. Seraphina said no. Her mother had forbidden her from going near the northern mountains. She had always said the place was cursed. Now Seraphina understood that her mother had never been afraid of the temple. She had been afraid of what Seraphina might discover there. Kael prepared to leave immediately. Seraphina stopped him. She said they needed more information. Before they could continue, the library doors shook violently. Someone was trying to enter. Kael drew his sword. Elias moved behind Seraphina. The 7 pups began growling. Then the doors burst open. A royal guard fell across the floor. Behind him stood a woman wearing a dark cloak. She lowered her hood. Seraphina froze. The woman had her mother's eyes. Not similar, the same. The stranger looked directly at Seraphina and whispered her name. Seraphina stepped forward. "Who are you?" The woman removed a silver pendant from beneath her cloak. It was the same pendant Seraphina's mother had worn on the night of the Moonblood massacre. Seraphina knew it instantly. The woman looked at Kael and then at the 7 pups. Tears filled her eyes. She said that she had been searching for Seraphina for years. Seraphina asked the question that had haunted her since childhood. "Where is my mother?" The woman looked toward the locked library door. She said that Seraphina's mother was alive, but she was not hiding from the Shadow Court. She was hiding from Seraphina. The words made Seraphina step back. Why? The woman hesitated. Then she revealed something that shattered the last piece of certainty Seraphina had left. "Because your mother knows what you really are." The 7 pups suddenly began howling. The silver mark beneath the smallest pup's neck burned brightly. The library windows shattered at once. Black arrows flew through the broken glass. Kael threw himself in front of Seraphina. Elias grabbed the pups. The stranger screamed that they had been found. Then a voice echoed from outside the palace. It belonged to Lucan. He told Seraphina that she could keep searching for her mother if she wanted. Then he revealed where she was. At the Moon Temple. Seraphina looked at Kael. The temple was no longer a mystery. It was a destination, and somewhere inside it waited the woman who had disappeared from her life. But Lucan had one final warning. He said that if Seraphina entered the temple before the next moonrise, she would awaken a power that could destroy everyone she loved. Seraphina stared through the broken window. Snow began falling into the library. The 7 pups gathered around her. Kael stood beside her with his sword in his hand. Seraphina finally understood that the truth she had spent her whole life searching for might be more terrifying than every lie she had survived. She looked toward the northern mountains. Then she said that she was going to find her mother, even if the truth destroyed her, even if the kingdom burned, even if the Alpha King had to stand against the entire world beside her. Kael looked at her and answered with a single promise. "This time you will not face it alone." And beyond the mountains, the ancient moon temple began to glow beneath the rising moon. Something inside it had awakened, and it had been waiting for Seraphina for 20 years. By midnight, the northern mountains had become a wall of ice and darkness. Kael rode at the front with his sword drawn while Seraphina followed beside him. The 7 white pups traveled inside a covered royal wagon guarded by Elias and 6 trusted warriors. The mysterious woman rode behind them in silence. She had finally given Seraphina her name, Mira. She claimed to have served Seraphina's mother for many years. Yet Seraphina still did not trust her. Too many lies had shaped her life. Too many people had known the truth while she had been left to suffer. She could not afford another mistake. The mountains rose higher with every mile. The path became narrower. Snow covered the old stones until only faint marks remained. Kael kept looking toward Seraphina. He wanted to speak, but knew there were wounds between them that could not be healed with a few apologies. Finally, Seraphina broke the silence. She asked him why he had followed her. Kael answered without hesitation, "Because you are walking toward danger." Seraphina looked ahead. She said that danger had followed her for years. Kael replied that this time it would have to pass through him first. The words should have made her feel safe. Instead, they frightened her. Safety was something Seraphina had forgotten how to accept. She remembered the night she had been rejected. She remembered standing beneath the palace moon while Kael told the entire kingdom that he could never choose an Omega like her. She remembered the laughter that followed. She remembered walking through the gates while every eye watched her humiliation. Then she remembered waking in a strange village with blood on her clothes and no memory of how she had survived. That night had changed her forever. She had stopped waiting for anyone to save her. She had learned to save herself. Now Kael was riding beside her as if 5 years had not passed. Seraphina finally looked at him and told him that if he betrayed her again, she would never forgive him. Kael did not defend himself. He said he knew. Then he added that he would rather earn her hatred honestly than ever again win her trust through a lie. A howl suddenly rose from the mountain valley. The horses panicked. The wagon stopped. The 7 pups began howling inside the covered carriage. Mira looked toward the cliffs. Her face changed. She told them to keep moving. Kael asked what she had seen. She said they were not alone. Black wolves appeared along the ridges, dozens of them. Their eyes reflected the moonlight. They were not ordinary wolves. Dark armor covered their bodies and black symbols were carved into their collars. Shadow Court hunters. Kael ordered the warriors into formation. The first attack came from above. Arrows fell through the snowstorm. 2 horses collapsed. Warriors raised shields while Kael rushed toward the nearest attacker. Seraphina did not hide behind him. She drew the small blade hidden beneath her cloak and moved through the chaos with deadly precision. She struck one hunter and took his weapon before he could recover. Another came toward her. Kael intercepted him. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Neither spoke. They fought together as if they had done it many times before. Then one of the hunters reached the wagon. The pup cries stopped. Seraphina froze. She ran toward the wagon and ripped open the covering. The 7 white pups were gone. Her heart dropped. She turned toward Mira. Mira was standing several steps away with tears in her eyes. She told Seraphina that the pups had not been taken. They had chosen the path themselves. Seraphina stared at the snow. Tiny white paw prints led toward a narrow passage between 2 cliffs. Kael followed her gaze. The passage ended at an ancient stone gate hidden beneath the ice. The same silver symbol marked its center. Seraphina knew that symbol. It was the mark from her childhood pendant. She walked toward the gate. As she touched it, the ice shattered. The stone doors opened by themselves. Beyond them stood the Moon Temple. The 7 pups were waiting inside. They were arranged in a perfect circle around an ancient altar. Moonlight poured through a broken opening in the ceiling and covered their white fur. The smallest pup stood at the center. Its silver mark was glowing brighter than before. Seraphina stepped into the temple. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind her. Kael tried to force them open. Nothing happened. Seraphina turned toward him. For the first time, there was panic in her eyes. Kael placed both hands against the stone. He told her he would find a way through. Seraphina nodded, but her attention had already been pulled toward the altar. A figure stood behind it. A woman. Her silver hair fell across her shoulders. She wore a white robe covered with ancient Moonblood symbols. Her face was older than Seraphina remembered from childhood dreams. But there was no doubt. It was her mother. Seraphina stopped breathing. The woman looked at her daughter and tears filled her eyes. She whispered her name. Seraphina could not move. For 20 years she had imagined this moment. She had imagined running into her mother's arms. She had imagined asking why she had been abandoned. She had imagined forgiveness. Instead, she stood several steps away and asked the question that had lived inside her heart since childhood. Why did you leave me? Her mother looked down. Because I was ordered to. Seraphina's face hardened. By whom? Her mother raised her eyes. By your father. Seraphina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her father had supposedly died protecting their family. Her mother had supposedly died with him. Now both truths were breaking apart. Kael finally heard something from inside the temple. He looked through a narrow opening in the stone doors. He saw Seraphina standing before the woman. Then he heard the mother's voice. She told Seraphina that the greatest secret had never been the 7 pups. It was Seraphina herself. The 7 heirs had been created to awaken an ancient royal power, but that power could only be controlled by one person, the first Moonblood heir. Seraphina? Her mother stepped forward and touched her face. Then she told her the truth that changed everything. Seraphina had never been an ordinary Omega. She had been born as the lost Moonblood princess, the true heir to the ancient kingdom. And 5 years ago, when Kael rejected her before the royal court, something inside her had awakened. Her mother whispered that the rejection had not destroyed her, it had unlocked her. Suddenly, the temple shook. The 7 pups began howling. A deep crack spread across the altar. Seraphina looked down at her hands. Silver light moved beneath her skin. Kael watched from outside as the ancient doors began to tremble. Then a voice echoed from the mountains. Lucan's voice. He said that the Moonblood princess had finally awakened, and he was coming to claim his throne. Seraphina lifted her head. Her eyes were no longer the eyes of the abandoned Omega. They were silver, cold, powerful, royal. And for the first time in 5 years, Kael realized something terrifying. He had never rejected a weak woman. He had rejected the most powerful woman in the kingdom. The mountain exploded with sound. The ancient temple shook beneath Seraphina's feet as silver light rushed through the cracks in the stone. The 7 white pups lifted their heads at the same moment. Their eyes reflected the same silver light that now burned inside Seraphina's veins. Outside the temple, Kael heard the mountain groan and realized the entire structure was beginning to collapse. He ordered his warriors to move away from the entrance. Nobody wanted to leave him. Kael ignored them. He placed both hands against the ancient doors and pushed with everything inside him. His wolf roared. The stone resisted. Then something answered from within the temple. A wave of power struck the doors and threw Kael backward into the snow. He landed hard. Before he could rise, the mountain trembled again. Seraphina's mother shouted her daughter's name. Kael heard it clearly through the stone. He rose despite the pain and stared at the sealed entrance. He knew the woman he had once rejected was changing into something the kingdom had feared for generations. Inside the temple, Seraphina stood frozen as silver energy moved around her. She could hear voices that were not coming from her mother. They were ancient voices. They spoke of kings and queens who had ruled before the current kingdoms existed. They spoke of bloodlines that had been erased from history. They spoke of 7 heirs who would awaken 7 ancient powers. Seraphina wanted to shut them out. She wanted to return to the simple life she had built for herself after leaving the palace. But that life was gone. The moment the silver mark appeared beneath her skin, she understood that she had never escaped her destiny. She had only delayed it. Her mother stepped toward her and explained that the Moonblood power did not make Seraphina a monster. It made her the guardian of the ancient wolf bloodlines. The 7 pups were not merely heirs. They were the last living vessels of 7 royal houses. If they were destroyed, the ancient bloodlines would disappear forever. If they survived, they could unite the kingdoms. Seraphina looked toward the 7 pups. They were no longer frightened. They stood proudly around the altar. The smallest one watched her with strange intelligence. Seraphina knelt and touched its head. A vision entered her mind. She saw Kael standing alone in the palace throne room. She saw Lucan beside him. She saw the council kneeling. Then she saw herself walking through the same room years later with the 7 heirs beside her. The vision changed. The palace was burning. Kael was on his knees. Lucan stood above him holding a black crown. Then Seraphina saw something she could not understand. Kael reached for her hand while blood covered his face. She tried to move toward him, but the vision ended. Seraphina opened her eyes and gasped. Her mother asked what she had seen. Seraphina said nothing. She could not explain why the future had shown her Kael's suffering. Outside the temple, another army had arrived. Thousands of black armored wolves surrounded the mountain. Lucan stood at the center of them. He wore a crown made from dark metal. The royal warriors looked at the army and understood that they were hopelessly outnumbered. Elias told Kael they had to retreat. Kael refused. He said Seraphina was inside. Elias reminded him that if they stayed, they would all die. Kael looked toward the temple. He remembered the woman he had rejected. He remembered her walking away while the entire kingdom watched. He remembered believing she was weak. Now he finally understood the cruel truth. He had not protected the kingdom by rejecting her. He had helped the people who wanted her destroyed. He had handed the most powerful woman in their world directly to her enemies. Kael dropped his sword. Elias stared at him. Then Kael walked toward the army alone. Lucan smiled when he saw him. He asked whether the great Alpha King had finally learned obedience. Kael stopped several steps away. He told Lucan that the crown had never made him a king. Lucan laughed. Kael continued. Power did not make him worthy. Fear did not make him worthy, and protecting his throne while destroying the woman he loved had been his greatest failure. Lucan's smile disappeared. Kael looked toward the temple. He said that he had spent 5 years believing Seraphina had been the reason his life fell apart. Now he knew that losing her had been the punishment for his own weakness. Lucan ordered the warriors to attack. The mountain became a battlefield. Kael shifted into his black wolf form and charged. His warriors followed. Snow erupted beneath their paws. Black wolves crashed into royal wolves across the frozen slope. Elias fought beside Kael, while the mountain echoed with howls. But Lucan's forces kept coming. For every enemy that fell, another appeared. Kael was eventually surrounded. Blades cut across his armor. Blood stained the snow. He refused to fall. Then the temple doors opened. Everything stopped. Seraphina stepped into the snow. Her dark hair moved in the mountain wind. Silver light surrounded her body. The 7 white pups stood behind her. Her mother followed at a distance. Every wolf on the battlefield lowered its head without understanding why. Even Lucan took a step backward. Seraphina looked at Kael. He was bleeding. She walked toward him. Kael lowered his head. Then something happened that nobody expected. The Alpha King dropped to one knee before her. The entire battlefield went silent. Seraphina stopped. Kael looked into her silver eyes and said that he had once rejected her because he believed she was not worthy of standing beside him. Now he knew the truth. He had never been worthy of standing beside her. Seraphina felt tears rise in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Lucan shouted that Kael was surrendering. Kael did not look at him. He told Seraphina that he was not asking for forgiveness. He was asking for the chance to fight for her without expecting anything in return. Seraphina stared at him for several seconds. Then she reached down and lifted his face. She told him that forgiveness was not his reward. It was something he would have to earn. Kael nodded. Then Seraphina turned toward Lucan. Her expression changed. The softness disappeared. The woman who had once begged for love was gone. The princess who had survived betrayal was standing before him. Lucan ordered every warrior to attack. Seraphina raised one hand. The ground beneath the army cracked. Silver roots of energy spread through the snow. One by one, the black wolves were forced to their knees. The ancient symbols on their armor shattered. Lucan tried to summon his own power, but the silver light surrounded him before he could finish the spell. He screamed. Seraphina walked toward him. She asked how many people had died because of his lies. Lucan laughed and said that kingdoms were built on sacrifice. Seraphina answered that sacrifice was what people called murder when they wanted to sleep at night. Lucan suddenly smiled. Then he revealed that he had never been afraid of Seraphina. He had been waiting for her to awaken. He reached inside his cloak and pulled out a small silver pendant. Seraphina froze. She knew it. It belonged to her mother. Lucan said that her mother had not told her everything. Seraphina turned toward her. Her mother looked terrified. Lucan laughed. He said the 7 pups were only the first part of the prophecy. The 8th heir was still missing, and the 8th heir was not a wolf. Seraphina felt the silver power around her suddenly disappear. She looked at her mother, then at Kael, then at the 7 white pups. Lucan whispered that the 8th heir had been hidden inside the royal bloodline for 20 years, and he was already inside the palace. Kael's face went pale, because there was only one person who could fit that description. The child of the old royal bloodline, the heir everyone believed had died. Kael slowly looked toward the distant kingdom. Someone was already waiting for them there. And that person had the power to destroy everything Seraphina had just awakened. The journey back to the kingdom became a race against time. Kael rode at the front while Seraphina followed beside him. The 7 white pups traveled between them under the protection of Elias and the royal warriors. Nobody spoke about Lucan's final revelation. They did not need to. The silence said enough. Somewhere inside the palace was the 8th heir. Someone had survived the Moonblood massacre. Someone had been hidden for 20 years. Someone had remained close to the throne while the entire kingdom believed the bloodline was dead. Seraphina kept looking toward the distant towers of her home. She no longer saw them as a place of safety. She saw them as a fortress filled with secrets. Kael noticed the tension in her face. He told her that whatever they found inside the palace, they would face it together. Seraphina looked at him and said that she had heard promises before. Kael accepted the warning. He told her that this time she would not have to believe his words. She would judge him by what he did. The palace gates were open when they arrived. That frightened Kael more than locked gates would have. There were no guards, no servants, no royal banners moving in the wind. The entire courtyard was empty. Kael raised his hand and ordered everyone to stop. The 7 white pups suddenly became restless. Their ears lifted. Their bodies turned toward the palace entrance. The smallest pup began growling. Seraphina stepped down from her horse. The silver mark beneath her skin began to glow. She knew something was close. Kael drew his sword and entered the courtyard with Seraphina beside him. Their footsteps echoed against the stone. Every door stood open. Every hallway was dark. The silence felt unnatural. Then they reached the throne room. Someone was sitting on the throne. Kael stopped. Seraphina froze. The person slowly stood. It was a young man. He looked barely 20 years old. His hair was silver. His eyes were the same deep blue as Seraphina's mother's. A royal mark covered the side of his neck. He wore no armor. He carried no weapon. Yet every wolf in the room lowered its head when he stepped forward. Seraphina whispered his name without knowing why. Aaron. The young man looked at her. Then he smiled. Sister. The word shattered the room. Seraphina could not move. Her mother had told her there had been 8 children. She had never said that the 8th was her brother. Aaron walked toward her slowly. He told her that their mother had hidden him inside the royal palace after the massacre. The old king had believed the child was dead. Lucan had known the truth. Instead of killing Aaron, he had hidden him where nobody would search. He had raised him beneath the palace while teaching him everything about the royal bloodline. Aaron had spent his entire life believing that Seraphina had abandoned him. Lucan had told him that his sister had chosen the Alpha King over her own family. Seraphina felt tears fill her eyes. She told Aaron that she had never known he existed. Aaron looked at Kael. He said that was exactly what Lucan wanted. Kael stepped forward and admitted that Lucan had controlled him too. He told Aaron that he had been manipulated into rejecting Seraphina. He had believed lies because he had been afraid of losing his crown. Aaron looked at him with anger. He said that fear had cost their family 20 years. Kael lowered his sword. He told Aaron that he could not change the past. but he could stop Lucan from controlling their future. Arryn stared at him for a long moment. Then the palace doors slammed shut. Lucan entered. He was no longer wearing the dark robes of a counselor. He wore the black crown. Behind him stood hundreds of warriors. The royal council followed. Every council member knelt before Lucan. Kael looked around the throne room and realized the truth. The coup had already happened. Lucan looked toward Seraphina and smiled. He told her that the kingdom had never belonged to Kael. It had belonged to the Shadow Court. Kael asked him why he had kept Arryn alive. Lucan answered that Arryn was useful. Arryn carried the blood needed to open the ancient royal vault. Seraphina looked toward the floor. She suddenly understood. The 7 pups were not the only keys. Arryn was the final key. Lucan ordered his warriors to seize the pups. They moved forward. The 7 white wolves transformed. Their tiny bodies became larger in an instant. Silver light covered their fur. Ancient symbols appeared across their chests. The soldiers stopped in fear. Seraphina stepped forward. The entire throne room shook. She told Lucan that he had spent 20 years teaching everyone to fear the Moonblood bloodline. Then she looked at the 7 heirs. She told him that he had made one mistake. He had taught them what they were capable of. The pups attacked. Chaos erupted. The Shadow Court warriors were thrown across the throne room. Silver energy shattered weapons. Ancient royal banners caught fire. The council members screamed and fled. Lucan tried to reach Arryn, but Kael intercepted him. The 2 men fought before the throne. Lucan struck Kael across the chest. Kael fell. Seraphina saw the blood. Something inside her broke. The silver power exploded from her body. Every window in the throne room shattered. The floor cracked beneath Lucan's feet. He dropped his sword. Seraphina walked toward him. He begged her to remember that he had protected the kingdom. She told him that he had never protected anything. He had only protected his power. Then Seraphina revealed the final truth. The prophecy had never said the Moonblood princess would destroy the kingdom. It said she would destroy the system that had ruled it from the shadows. Lucan screamed as silver chains wrapped around him. The Shadow Court symbol on his chest shattered. Every hidden document appeared in the air above the throne. Every order. Every murder, every betrayal, every lie. The entire kingdom could see them through the palace crystal network. The people outside watched as the truth of the royal council was revealed. Lucan had nowhere left to hide. Kael slowly stood. He walked toward Seraphina. Then he did something the kingdom had never seen. He removed his crown. He placed it on the floor before her. He told everyone that the woman he had rejected 5 years ago was not a cursed Omega. She was the Moonblood princess, the true protector of the 7 ancient bloodlines. Then he turned toward Seraphina. He told her that he had once chosen his crown over her. Now he was willing to lose the crown if that was what it took to prove that he had changed. Seraphina looked at him. For the first time since her return, she smiled. It was small, it was fragile, but it was real. She told him that she did not want his crown. She wanted the man beneath it. Kael stepped closer. He asked whether she could ever love him again. Seraphina touched his face. She told him that she had never stopped loving the man she believed he could become. Then she kissed him. The throne room became silent. The 7 white heirs gathered around them. Arryn stood beside their mother. For one beautiful moment, the family that had been torn apart by lies stood together. But then the smallest white pup suddenly turned toward the palace doors. Its silver eyes widened. A distant howl answered from beyond the kingdom. Seraphina pulled away from Kael. Her expression changed. Arryn looked toward the northern mountains. Their mother whispered that the prophecy was not finished. Kael asked what remained. She looked at the 7 heirs, then at Arryn, then at Seraphina. She said there was one final bloodline that had not awakened, the lost royal bloodline. the one that had been missing for 1,000 years. Suddenly, the smallest pup began changing again. Its white fur disappeared beneath silver light. Its body transformed into a young wolf, larger than the others. A golden crown-shaped mark appeared across its forehead. Seraphina stared. Her mother whispered the final truth. The smallest pup was not one of the 7 heirs. It was the first heir, the original moon wolf, and it had chosen Seraphina as its queen. Outside the palace, the entire kingdom heard its howl. The ancient mountains answered. The sky turned silver, and somewhere beyond the northern horizon, something awakened that had been sleeping since the first Alpha King ruled the world. The silver sky above the kingdom had not darkened after the howl. It had become brighter. Moonlight poured across the palace towers, as if the night itself had opened its eyes. Seraphina stood in the center of the throne room with Kael beside her. The 7 white heirs were gathered around their mother. Arryn stood behind them. The ancient moonwolf watched from the center of the chamber with golden eyes that seemed to contain memories older than the kingdom itself. Nobody moved. Nobody dared to speak. Then the great wolf lowered its head toward Seraphina. A wave of silver energy passed through the room. Every candle went out. Every shadow disappeared. For one heartbeat, the entire palace became completely silent. Then a voice echoed inside Seraphina's mind. It was not the voice of a wolf. It was the voice of an ancient queen. It told her that the bloodline had returned because the kingdom was standing at the edge of another betrayal. Seraphina looked toward Kael. He immediately understood that something had happened. He asked what she had heard. She told him that the ancient bloodline had awakened because someone inside the kingdom still carried the Shadow Court mark. Lucan had been defeated. His warriors had been exposed. His council had fallen. Yet the danger had not ended. The Shadow Court had existed for generations. Lucan had only been one branch of something much larger. Kael looked around the throne room. The royal warriors had begun searching every council member. One old lord suddenly tried to flee. Arryn stopped him before he reached the doors. The man fell to his knees and begged for mercy. A black symbol appeared beneath his collar. Seraphina stared at it. She knew that mark. It was the same symbol she had seen beneath the old temple. The man admitted that he had served the Shadow Court for 30 years. But then he said something that made the entire room freeze. He said the Shadow Court had never wanted Seraphina dead. They wanted her crowned. Seraphina stepped closer. Why? The old lord looked at the moonwolf. Because only the true Moonblood queen can open the gate beneath the ancient mountain. Kael asked what was behind the gate. The man refused to answer. The moonwolf suddenly growled. The ancient sound shook the walls. The old lord began trembling. He said that the gate contained the first royal throne. It had been sealed thousands of years ago after the first Alpha King betrayed the Moon Queen. The kingdom had been built on the ruins of that betrayal. Every royal family that came afterward had inherited the crown without knowing its true origin. The Shadow Court had guarded the secret for generations, because whoever opened the gate would gain control over every ancient bloodline. Seraphina finally understood why the 7 heirs had been hunted, why Arryn had been hidden, why her mother had disappeared, why Lucan had manipulated Kael. The Shadow Court did not want to destroy the bloodline. They wanted to control it. Kael took Seraphina's hand. This time she did not pull away. He told her that whatever waited beneath the mountain, they would face it together. Seraphina looked at their joined hands. 5 years ago, she would have given anything for those words. Now they meant something different. She no longer needed Kael to save her. She wanted him beside her because she chose him. That difference mattered. She looked into his eyes and told him that if they survived what came next, she would not return to being the woman she had once been. Kael said he did not want that woman back. He wanted the woman standing before him now. Seraphina smiled faintly. Then the palace shook. A deep roar came from beneath the earth. The old lord screamed that the gate had opened. The moonwolf turned toward the northern mountains. The 7 heirs began moving in the same direction. Seraphina understood. The ancient gate was calling them. Before dawn, the royal army marched toward the mountain. Kael rode beside Seraphina. Aren stayed close to their mother. The 7 heirs traveled together beneath the protection of the moonwolf. The kingdom watched from the roads as they passed. People who had once whispered about the cursed Omega now bowed their heads. Some cried. Some reached toward the white wolves as if they were seeing legends become real. Seraphina felt none of the old humiliation. She felt something stronger. She felt free. At the base of the mountain they found the gate. It was enormous. Black stone rose from the earth in the shape of 2 wolves facing each other. Silver symbols covered the surface. In the center was a handprint, Seraphina's handprint. Her mother tried to stop her. She said that once the gate opened, there would be no way back. Seraphina looked at her. She said that she had spent her entire life running from doors other people had closed. This time she would open one herself. She placed her hand against the stone. The mountain exploded with silver light. The gate opened. Beyond it was not a treasure chamber. It was a kingdom. An ancient city lay beneath the mountain. Towers of white stone rose from a vast valley. Frozen rivers reflected the moonlight. Thousands of statues stood along the streets. Every statue represented an Alpha King who had ruled before the modern kingdoms existed. At the center stood a massive throne carved from silver stone, the Moon Queen throne. Seraphina walked toward it. Then the statues began turning their heads. One by one, Kael raised his sword. The ancient kings were waking. A voice filled the underground kingdom. It asked who had entered the sacred city. Seraphina stepped forward. She said she was Seraphina Vale. The voice answered that name no longer belonged to her. Then the silver throne began glowing. A crown appeared above it. Not a crown made of metal, a crown made of living moonlight. It descended toward Seraphina's head. Kael watched in silence. The 7 heirs lowered themselves. Aren bowed. Her mother cried. Seraphina closed her eyes. The crown touched her forehead. The entire ancient city awakened. Then a figure appeared at the end of the throne room. An enormous black wolf. Its eyes were red. Its fur was darker than the night. Kael immediately recognized the ancient symbol on its chest, the mark of the first Alpha King. The wolf spoke inside their minds. It told Seraphina that the Moon Queen had returned. Then it looked at Kael and said the Alpha King had returned as well. Kael stepped forward. The ancient wolf told him that every king before him had failed the Moon Queen. Everyone had chosen power over love. Everyone had eventually betrayed the woman beside him. Seraphina looked at Kael. The wolf asked whether he would repeat the same mistake. Kael removed his crown. He placed it on the ground. Then he knelt before Seraphina. He told the ancient wolf that he had already made the mistake once. He would spend the rest of his life proving that he would never make it again. The ancient wolf stared at him. Then it smiled. The ground stopped shaking. The statues became still. The ancient kingdom accepted him. But before Seraphina could speak, another sound came from the darkness. A newborn cry. Everyone turned. Behind the silver throne stood a woman holding a tiny child. Seraphina's mother gasped. Aren stepped backward. Kael reached for his sword. Seraphina stared at the woman. She knew her face. It was the same face she had seen in the oldest Moonblood paintings, the first Moon Queen. But she had been dead for 1,000 years. The woman looked at Seraphina and smiled. She said that the prophecy had been misunderstood. The 7 heirs were not the final children. Aren was not the final heir. Seraphina was not the final queen. The tiny child in her arms was the true beginning. The child opened its eyes. They were silver and gold. The first Moon Queen whispered that the child carried the blood of both the Moon Queen and the first Alpha King. Then she looked at Seraphina and revealed the final secret. The child was her own son, the heir of the ancient throne, and he had been waiting for Seraphina to return for 20 years.